Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines are unchangified, so exam 1, quizzes part 2, deadline March 1st, so not this Friday, but the next Friday. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, April 5th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, April 26th. And the final deadlines at the end of the normal final time during finals week, but again, is available online. For the paper, draft deadline April 4th, +5 deadline April 9th, emergency deadline April 16th, desperation deadline April 26th. Next Tuesday, 2/26, no class, got meetings from 12:30 to 5. Unfortunately, I planned for that, so we'll be able to cover everything, no problem. Okay, so let's start looking at our good dead friend David Hume after looking at our good dead friend John Locke. And we saw that Locke's approach to skepticism is very pragmatic. Namely, yeah, we can't be sure that the bus is real, the fire is real, the shark is real, but from a pragmatic standpoint, you can imagine a case like at the ocean, you see a big shark, you're like, I wonder if that shark exists. And Locke would say, hey, you can't be sure if the shark exists, but you don't want to like jump in there and wrestle with it because it would hurt a whole bunch. So he takes a very pragmatic approach. Again, if you're looking for a well-focused paper topic, interesting one would be that question. Is it a good idea to take that pragmatic approach to skepticism? And the arguments for it, be essentially kind of the ones Locke makes. He uses a video game analogy where, yeah, we know when we're playing a video game it's not real, but if we play like it's not, like we stand in fire and do stupid stuff, it's going to be not a lot of fun. And so you could argue from a pragmatic standpoint that that's good enough. And then, of course, the counter arguments would be, well, yeah, true, from a practical standpoint, that's what we maybe should do, but then you can still raise the question of, but does that tell us what we actually know? And then you can reply back, well, it doesn't really matter. What really matters is, does it hurt, not do we know? Then we turn to our good dead friend David Hume, in terms of where he fits into the hierarchy or categories of things. He's an empiricist, so he thinks whatever we know it comes from the senses, and he rejects innate ideas, and we saw that distinction he drew between relations of ideas, which is basically how ideas connect together. So like, for example, by definition that if Sam is a bachelor, Sam is unmarried and male, but you can't know that just by knowing what a bachelor is. That would be a matter of fact, which is something about the world, which you can't know just by pure reason. Now, since our focus here is on the external world, we're looking at what Hume says about, can we know if there's stuff out there? And right off the bat, he says, yeah, those aren't even the right questions. So the question is not, is there stuff out there? And Hume says, essentially this kind of gives up at the start saying, yeah, that's not the question. He says there's two questions. One, why do we think that there's stuff out there that keeps going? So there's two parts to that. One is, why do we think there's stuff out there, that things have distinct existence apart from us, and that they keep on going, continued existence. Now again, these are psychological questions, because going back to the analogy of the monster in the closet, if you have someone, if a psychologist says, someone goes to a psychologist and says, little Billy thinks there's a monster in the closet, the psychologist is not going to say, what is the monster, and take out their book about monster killing and see what it is, as they say on Supernatural, how do we kill this thing? They'll say, why does little Billy believe in the monster? And essentially he's doing the same thing with us. He's not saying what's out there, but why do we believe it? So the first thing he considers is maybe the senses do that. But can our senses tell us that stuff is still going when we're not sensing it? For example, think of like outside this room. Do our senses tell us that that stuff is still there? No, because we can't see it. It'd be impossible. Similarly, our senses can't tell us that stuff exists distinct from our senses, because we'd have to sense it when we're not sensing it, which we can't do. So the senses can't help us through. Now, being thorough, Hume doesn't just say, well, we're done, can't know. He's going to go through and present all the arguments he can pack into his book. Now, one way to kind of do it is to look at sort of, again, psychologically, why do we think there's stuff out there? And one thing is that, well, we play the game of life from the first person perspective. Life as a first person liver. And of course, like in video games, they have the different first person perspective. So you look at it like, well, you look at life, it's from your perspective, so you can see like hands and stuff. And of course, there's also third person where you see it from the camera behind the character. So I would tend to think like the backpack is out there because I can see like my hands, and I know like my liver's in here, and probably never seen it. I hope I never see it, but it's in there, and that's out there. So out there, this is me, stuff's out there, it's outside of my body. So probably not stuff out there. Now Hume says, good effort, but no. And here's why no. He says, you don't actually perceive your body, which seems like a weird thing to say. It's like, surely I'm perceiving my body. What he says is, not that you're not like feeling stuff, it's that, yeah, you're feeling stuff, but you're not actually perceiving that you have a physical body in the external world. What you're doing is you're having, perceptions, of stuff, but it may not be out there because you don't see the outlets. So he's not claiming, he's not making the claim that you don't actually, feel stuff like that. You don't feel your hand or your tummy, or etc. But his claim is you're not actually seeing an object that is your body. You don't know that, and seeing objects outside of it. And he could use the example of the dream. When you're dreaming, I guess people, as far as I know in my own case, I dream from like first person perspective, even in my dreams. But of course, that doesn't prove there's stuff going. The dream world is real, even though it looks that way. So his claim essentially is, yeah, you can like see your hand, but maybe all of this is just in your mind. I mean, to use it, you didn't know about video games, obviously, but think about it with a video game. If you're playing the video game, there's not like a real, like if you see your characters like hands or arms, it's not like there's a real, that the video game is real because you can see the character's arms. You just have, it's all just part of the image. So it doesn't tell you that it's real. So basically his claim is, it seems like there's stuff out there, but for all you know, all of it is just in here, including your image of your hand. Also, as he notes, things like sounds, taste, smells, etc., we kind of like initially think they're out there, but are they out there? No, because in a way it's kind of a trick, because sound is not the vibration of an object, it's what we hear. And taste is not out there, it's what's going on in here.
So it's really not real.
In a way, it is real in the sense that you experience it. So for example, if you have like tinnitus, like the ringing in the ear, no one else hears it. Like if someone has tinnitus, you can't put your head against theirs and hear that. But if you've got tinnitus, then you are hearing sounds, but there's no noise. It's just usually like a virus or something. And it's weird. I had it once, and it knocked out certain ranges of hearing. So everyone sounded like almost everyone sounded like a robot because it knocked out. Because I could still hear people, but it knocked out certain tones and ranges. It basically is like having a built-in audio filter. And at first it was kind of funny, and then the doctor's like, yeah, you can lose your hearing. I'm like, that's not funny. It stopped being funny enough. Fortunately, it cleared up. So. Similar like taste. It's not, I mean, we think like it's caused by the eating stuff, but the taste is in our mind. So we kind of think of those things being out there, but then when we reflect on it, we realize they're out there, they're in our mind. So the experiences we have don't show to us that there's stuff outside of ourselves. Now, at this point, he raises the thing about, well, doesn't sight tell us that there is stuff? Like you look around and the desk seems to be like, about 6 feet from me, the back wall, 20 feet or so, and we seem to see distance. So you can say, well, I do see the external world because I'm seeing extended space. Now, Hume's got an interesting reply here. He says, we don't see distance, we judge distance. Not in the sense of like harshly judging it, like in a mean way, like I'm judging distance. Because all we have to do is, essentially, is we get the visual data, and then we've got to go through the process of assessing it. Now we do it so quickly, and we've done it for so long, we don't realize that when we look around the room, we're judging the distance. Now we do notice this if you're doing something like you're trying to play darts or do something, because then you're actually trying to judge the distance. But he does say that we don't see distance, we judge it. And a good illustration of this is drawings on computer games, etc. Because what you're doing when you're playing like a computer game is your brain is processing the two-dimensional image to see it in 3 dimensions, which is why dogs don't play computer games enough. It just looks like a flat screen to them. They don't apparently get that, which is probably good. Otherwise, they'd be spending so much time playing video games. It'd be terrible for them. Now, this is supported by something Hume was not aware of because it happened long after his time. But I mentioned how they had restored people, given people sight, who didn't have sight before, and they were adults, so they could talk and communicate, etc. And they asked them questions like, can you tell the shapes, and also how they looked at the world. Because if distance was just there, as soon as you got sight, you'd be like, fine. It's like, it's just. But they found out people had to figure this stuff out, like how far away things are by sight. Now we learned to do that when we were kids, so we don't have any conscious process. We don't have to think, okay, now I'm judging this distance, blah blah. We just do it. Just like we can play video games. Fine. Our mind just automatically processes that. Or when we look at drawings, dogs don't get drawings because they don't process that stuff, unless they're delicious drawings and they eat them. Similar to homework. So he thinks that we can't know there's stuff out there because what we're doing is we're not seeing the distance, we're inferring. We're saying we see these shapes and patterns, therefore there's distance. Now if we just saw the distance, then we could say, yeah, we see the out there. But we don't see the out there, we infer the out there. So we don't know if there's an out there. We're just kind of an out there idea. So he says, that's not going to help. Then he turns to talking about the philosophers and the vulgar. Now what he means here is, well, philosophers. And he doesn't bring up any particular people by name, because back when Hume was Huming, their academics are different. You didn't have to footnote everything, because less copyright, etc. So one downside is we don't always, unless they say hey, I'm talking mean about Descartes, we don't know, we can kind of guess. But they're not too much footnoting, etc. inside it. Now the vulgar, he doesn't mean people who are vulgar in the sense that they're swearing a lot. He means the many, the masses. And philosophy, tragically, has a long history of being insulting to the masses. Like if you read Aristotle, he's really down on the masses. He thinks they need to be controlled with pain, so pretty harsh. So to be less horrible, what he basically is distinguishing is is this is sort of the philosophers would be sort of the scientific, academic view, and then common sense, which is a nice way of putting it other than talking about the vulgar. So essentially, we'd say science, philosophy versus common sense. So what he thinks is going on is that we all have a common sense view of how our impressions and perceptions work. And then philosophers come along, and what he essentially is talking about here, he hasn't footnoted or go into great detail, but he specifically is talking about that representational realism versus just our common sense view. Now, he does note, and the way he divides them up is the following way. He says, the philosophers he's talking about accept that primary, secondary distinction. And the primary quality is supposed to be what?
What's the actual stuff that's out there?
Yeah, stuff that's supposed to
The
be.
mass, right? Like solidness.
Yeah, exactly. It's up, it's supposed to be the stuff that's supposed to be out there. And as I said, like mass, volume, density, the physical properties of objects. Now, common sense tells us that mass, density, volume is where. Maybe ask a kid, where's this, where is the shape, or where is the volume? They may think, what a weird question, but they'd probably say it's there. Where's the weight of the backpack? It's there, or the backpack, it's out there. And similarly, if you ask, the representational realist, they would say it's out there, because, so their picture, if you have the idea of, the shape of the backpack, there is the shape of the backpack out there, for real. And common sense tells us the same thing. The idea is that the backpack, the quality, the shape is out there. So both views agree about that. Objects and stuff that are out there, and things like mass, density, volume are out there for real. Now the secondary qualities, those would be things like
Like taste and feel and things like that.
yeah, exactly. Color, taste, feels, and they were supposed to be, according to philosophers, where do those live? Yeah, in your mouth. So if you're eating, cereal like Kix, the taste is in the shape. It's got the primary qualities that give it the shape. They interact with the taste buds in your tongue, and a signal goes to your brain, and you get the taste of the shape. Yeah, and so those qualities are in there. Now, by common sense, before people get corrupted by philosophy, if you ask, little Sally or little Billy, where's the blue, Billy? Where's the blue? Yeah, then Billy would point to if you say, where's the shape? Billy would point to this. If you say, where's the color? Billy would point to that. Which is, common sense. It's supposed to be out there. Yeah, so they'd say the color is out there in the world. But of course, according to the philosophers, it lives in your head. So if you were talking, to representational realists, they'd say, yeah, there's a folder out there, the shape, mass, density, volume are out there, but the color's in here. It has proper, it reflects light a certain way, that your retina, triggers stuff in your brain, so you see blue. But common sense is, what you see is what you get blue. It's out there. So disagreement. So with the primary, check. Secondary, they disagree. The vulgar think the secondary are out there with the primary, so they don't make that distinction. But the scientists and philosophers think that's in people's heads. The third thing is pains and pleasures. So we'll go back to little Billy and little Sally. Suppose Billy trips and falls on his face, and you ask Sally, where is Billy's pain? Yeah, his face. But where does it hurt? Where does is the pain in the brick, or falls and hits his face in the brick? Well, no, the pain is in he's experiencing. It's in his mind. Yeah, I mean, his face hurts, but the pain is in his mind. It's not like pain is not out in the world. Like if you're walking along, you won't see like a whole bunch of pain just laying around. Like, whoa, feel all that pain. There are things that can cause pain, but pain's not out there. Yeah, so we would say pain is in the brain, which got to be true because it rhymes, because all true things rhyme.
The vulgar is basically like the mass.
Yeah, common sense. Yeah. The view we have before we get into too much philosophy, or the view we have when we're not thinking philosophical. Because, like in when we're just going through our day, we're not thinking, gosh, the stop sign's red is just in my mind. We just think the stop sign is red. But when we think our pains are not, we don't think like the pain is in the brick or the blade or the hot food. We think the pain is in our mind, in our brain. And so when it comes to the pain and stuff, the vulgar, feelings, and like emotions and stuff, we think that our emotions are not out there. Like if Billy's like angry, because he fell on his face in the brick, we'd say the anger is in his mind. It's not like out there in the world. Now, so he makes those divisions. Now, so what we do normally, we think that, again, if we talk to people before they've been corrupted philosophy, or we're thinking normally, we think colors and sounds and stuff are out there. Now, do most people know the arguments that philosophers and scientists make about colors and so forth? Well, eventually, maybe you have to go take a class like this. But most people, especially in Hume's time, wouldn't. So they, the many, common sense view wouldn't be influenced by that. So the beliefs of people commonsensically who haven't been exposed to philosophy obviously aren't swayed by those arguments. So they believe what they believe, not based on philosophical argumentations, etc., but again, kind of like on a common sense thing. So kind of the question is, why do we believe there's stuff out there? And if you talk to, people before they've been corrupted by philosophy and science, it can't be for the philosophical and scientific reasons because they don't have those. So if you went to, little Billy and said, little Billy, why do you believe there's stuff out there? Little Billy wouldn't advance, typically, unless he's been corrupted by philosophy, he would probably just say, well, I see it, or, you're just a common sense view. Now, the problem is kind of this. Basically, Hume's going to say we're all crazy, because once you get exposed to philosophy, so now, hearing this, you become crazy, because we all have the common sense view, and then once you get exposed to the science and philosophy, you get this view, and the two aren't compatible, even though we believe kind of both. So why are they compatible? Well, according to philosophy, whatever is in our mind isn't out there. Well, what's in our mind, and the way it's obviously true, what's in our mind is not out there. So the idea is that all our perceptions have two qualities. One is that they're dependent on our mind. So for example, our idea of a folder can't like drift out of our head and be like running around the room, which is probably good. And so perceptions are mind dependent. To use a crappy analogy, could you like reach into your phone, and if you have a picture of like a dog, could you pull a dog out of your phone? No, which would be kind of handy though. Just take it here, take pictures of food, just pull that out. And so, yeah, our ideas only exist in our perceptions exist only in our mind. Also, the philosophers claim that our perceptions are interrupted. Namely, I mean, if you look around the room, when you look away from something, the perception is gone. So if I'm looking at the marker, when I put it away, my perception is gone. I can still remember it, but the perception is gone. So my idea of the marker depends on my mind, and just like a picture of the phone depends on the phone. And when I'm not looking at it, my perception is gone. So they're dependent and interrupted. So philosophy tells us that. Now the vulgar view, according to Hume, is that basically it's this naive realism. That perceptions, what we see is what we get. So the perception and the object are the same. So the marker doesn't depend on, my idea of the marker doesn't depend on my mind, and it continues to exist even when I'm not looking at it. Because for the vulgar view, the idea is, there's the object, and then I get the idea when I'm looking at it. For the vulgar, again, the object is the idea of the object, and so when you're looking at it, you're perceiving it, but when it's gone, it's still existing, and you're not perceiving it, but it still exists. And so it causes the problem. All that pixel dust. Or expo dust, probably the worst. Terrible stuff. Who knows what's in there? Yeah, no warning labels. Doesn't mean anything. Probably all EDT or something. So on the philosophical view, yeah, we say, okay, we're perceiving, we got the idea, we're not looking at it, the idea goes away. Again, we can use the analogy of like taking a picture of your phone. Take a picture of your phone, and if you turn your camera on, you're kind of waving it around. The image is only there when you're focused on it, and then when you move it away, it's gone. And for the naive view, it's like, well, the picture is still there even when you're not putting the camera on it somehow. And so these are different views, because the philosophical view says, yeah, this idea, it goes away when you're not looking, it depends on your mind. Naive realism says, what you see is what you get, so the idea and the thing are essentially the same, so when you're not looking, it's still around, it doesn't depend on you. And of course, those both can't be true. At least one of them is going to be wrong. So right off the bat, we have this problem, because in our common sense view, we think this. For example, we think the color is still there when we're not looking at it. But then, science and philosophy tell us, no, it's not. That's not there when we're not looking at it. Perceptions are gone. So then, why do we think this stuff? Well, Hume brings in our imagination. So how does that work? Well, suppose we take the naive realistic view that objects are the ideas, the perception is the object is the perception. Now in this case, we can't infer the existence of one from the other because they're one, in a way. And now, part of Hume's reason for this, because he has his own kind of view of cause and effect, which we'll see in the future. But the gist of it is this. Hume says, short version, here's how cause and effect works. Hume raises the question, why do we believe in cause and effect? And again, it's going back to the monster in the closet thing. He doesn't say, what is cause and effect? He says, we can't know. Why do we think it? And what he says is the way we get the idea of cause and effect is we see one thing happen followed by another. Now, the first time it happens, we don't say one causes another because we think, well, maybe it's just chance. It could just be coincidence. But if it keeps happening over and over, eventually we say, aha, there's got to be a connection. Like for example, if you ever go to like a house and you've never been to before, there's like lots of switches for lights. And of course what you do is you try to figure out like what does this turn on? And sometimes it's weird. It's like you flip a switch and you can't see anything go on. And you have like someone like run around like, what's on? Yeah, this one, it's the back light. And this one, that's the bathroom light. It's like, who did this? Why would that be done? And so, kind of like if you flip a switch, you see like, okay, the light keeps going on and off. You think, there must be a causal connection. Now, Hume says, here's the problem. We never see the causal connection. Metaphorically speaking, we can never see like, we can of course see the wires, real, we can never see the actual causal connection, because the first time it happens, thing happens. Second time it happens again. But is there any actual difference in terms of what you see? No, happens. And if you looked at it separately, everyone would seem to be the same. It's not like after 20 times, suddenly you're like, you see the force, or you see the matrix.
Right.
It just after a while, you just say, well, you expect that to happen. Kind of like, years later, the famous Pavlov's dog experiment. Or if you have a dog of your own. If you always do a certain thing before feeding your dog, then your dog expects, food. Like for example, when I had a husky, I'd always get myself like a drink, and I'd get the ice maker would go, and her treats were there, so I always give her a treat. And so every time she heard the ice maker, she expected a treat, even though there's no, the ice maker does not make the treats. But she just knew, ice maker sound, treats. And so we just form a psychological connection. So for Hume, you got to be able to observe one thing followed by another. Now, if we take our perceptions to be our objects, the same thing, we can't, according to Hume at least, do cause and effect, because we don't have two things. So in a way, the gist of it kind of is, we can't say that the objects cause our perceptions, and probably the obvious thing you should have said is, just they're the same thing. So one can't cause the other because there's no the other. So what about the other approach? So for the common sense view, it doesn't make any sense to say that our objects cause our perceptions because they're the same. It'd be kind of like saying the folder causes the folder. What? Now, what about on the philosophical view? Well, he says, on this view, our perception is not the object. I mean, going back to the analogy of the phone, you got the picture of your phone, and you got the object, pictures of the object. Now, Hume says in that case, if we take that view, we still can't say the object causes the perception. Why not? Well, we'll see in a bit. But he says we can't. So then, if reason doesn't allow us to do it, I mean, I guess, spoiler alert, here's why. We can never, it's the old skeptical argument. Namely, you can't step outside of your mind and see the object matching the perception. Because the thing would be is, even if you could somehow get outside your own mind, which you can't do, you'd just be seeing this. And the question would be, am I really seeing the object in my perception? I would just be having a perception of, my perception and my perception of the object. So we can solve the problem. To go back to my analogy about, that the example where you wake up in a kind of Black Mirror thing, you wake up, no memories, and you're in a room full of monitors, and you have to pick which monitor is showing something real, but you can't get outside the room. It would be like if you see a picture, like a camera looking down at the room, and you see you, and you see a room next door with like a tiger in it, and you see it over here. Well, you still don't know if that's real because maybe this part is fake. So you're just having you'd have to get into the room with a photographer. So if you get a picture of something, of you seemingly being next to something or seeing something, you're still just getting another picture. You can't confirm it's really there because you can never get out of your own mind. So what Hume says is, what we're doing is, we're just imagining. Roughly put, we're just making it up. We say, yeah, got the perception, got the object, they're two separate things. So reason, he claims, doesn't support that objects are out there independent of us. It doesn't support that they continue to exist when we're not seeing them. We imagine that. That's to say it's crazy. We're thinking things exist, we actually have no reason for it. We're just imagining it. So again, going back to the monster in the closet, little Billy doesn't think there's a monster in the closet because it's a monster. He's just imagining it.
So I have a question.
Yes.
So the vulgar would say that the object is there because we perceive it, and the skeptics would say it's our imagination.
Yeah, because the realist says the object is the perception. What you see is what you. It's a view we have when we're kids. We don't have this idea that we have a brain with a perceptual system. We just think, what we see is what we get. Then when we learn about the brain and nervous system and perceptions, then we think, aha, there's something out there that's causing stuff in here. So we have this representation in there of something out there. And then the skeptic says, well, how do you know? And the vulgar, in a way, they kind of avoid the problem because there's just one thing. So if you say to naive realism, how do you know that what you're experiencing is there? They'd say, what? How do you know what you're seeing? How do you know you're seeing what you're seeing? You just say, you've answered the question. I'm seeing what I'm seeing. There is no gap. Now, Hume's argument is that we can't, justify this through reason. So if we're thinking this, roughly put, we got to be just making stuff up. So a critical part of this is that our common sense says one thing, what you see is what you get, and our science and philosophy says, no, we have objects out there, we perceive them, what we see is not what we get, but we have representations of what's out there. And then the question is, why do we think that? And Hume says we have no reason to think this, so we must be just making stuff up. It'd be like someone who thinks there's a monster in their closet, you say, what are your reasons? And they just say, I think so. Now, another way people try to argue for there being stuff out there, on the philosophical side, and we saw this in Locke, this is one of Locke's arguments, that he makes the argument that things that are real are more vivid and are involuntary, that we experience them in a way that seems like we're not in control, so they're just like popping up. And also they're very much more vivid. He gave the argument that, for example, if you think of an injury you had, or like getting a tooth drilled or something, bringing it up again may cause like emotional distress, like the time I had my tooth drilled, but it's not going to cause physical pain. You can't, which is a good thing. You can't like cause yourself incredible pain just by remembering past pains, which is good. A lot of people are walking along and thinking like something, be like, oh god, falling over. I mean, emotional pain, yeah, that happened, which actually supports Hume's point. So Locke's argument kind of was, when you remember something that hurt, it doesn't really hurt. And of course, you go and control how stuff appears to you. I mean, here's an obvious example. When you're driving and a car hits your car, you're not controlling it. Now, Hume counters this. First thing is this. well, actually kind of smushes them together. We feel things like pain and pleasure, passions and emotions. We can feel them incredibly strongly and involuntarily. So, for example, think of like anger. Anger can be really strong, and people can feel anger without any control. They just get triggered, and people can self-trigger. I mean, you might say, well, they'd be angry at something, but a person could be like super angry with or sadness, like deep depression. It could be sort of ironically, it's weird to say like depression is usually cast as gray, but it could be like a really strong depression, and they're not controlling it, because otherwise they wouldn't. When people say, when people are depressed, people often say, why don't you just not do that? That's not how it works. It's like saying to someone, why don't you not have cancer? It's like, if only. Yeah, so our emotions, our feelings, etc., can be very vivid and completely involuntary. People often feel things they don't want to feel. They would rather not. And so, but we don't think that our anger is out there just because it's. We don't think like of our anger as like a monster out there, just because it's vivid and involuntary. We think it's in our mind. So kind of his counter argument against Locke is, Locke says things that are really vivid and strong and involuntary probably real. Hume says, well, we think that anger, pleasure, love, etc. aren't out there, but they're very vivid and they can be quite involuntary. So that doesn't work. So if you happen to want to write about Locke's response to skepticism, here's Hume's objection, that there are things that are vivid and involuntary that we commonsensically intuitively think are all in our head. So if we're going to use that to say that something's out there, then we either have to accept that love is out there, or anger is out there, or we'd have to accept that it's not true. Or we have to give an argument as to why the vividness and voluntariness of feelings doesn't prove are out there, but vividness of, say, other stuff does show that it's out there. There's a difference between anger and fire. Or you could go the pragmatic argument. You could say, you could take the view, yeah, anger not out there, but when you're dealing with fire, you treat it as if it's out there. Whereas in the case of anger, you don't need to think of anger as being out there to get around the world. Because it's not like you avoid anger by walking around the anger. That's close. You avoid fire by seeming to walk around the fire. So that could be a counter to that counter. That's why philosophy is endless argument, because you can always probably give a reason for something, which is good, which means eternal employment for philosophers until they decide not to fund us anymore. So that's where he is at this point. Now, before heading to our next stuff, you think about this. Or hey, getting more stuff. Now I was thinking of the movie Inside Out, that's for sure, little emotion entities. Good movie. Actually based on real psychology. Because anger really is something fiery dude in your mind. Now, the science and philosophy, of course, the thing we learn is that our vulgar view of direct realism, that we are told that's wrong. So if we get rid of that, if we believe that that is not true, then we've got to come up with another answer. So if we're told, little Billy and Sally learn that, okay, color is all in your head, and then you accept representational realism, then why then, if we believe that, why do we think the stuff is out there, independent and continued? And again, Hume becomes kind of messy because in a way, again, he's doing psychology. He's like, it's like we're a patient, sitting on the couch, so why do you, why do you believe this? Why do you think there's a monster in your closet? So he considers basically three factors that could cause us to believe this. And I mean, in a way, he is doing like a psychoanalysis. It'd be sort of like if someone comes in and they have trouble with their relationships, and the person says, you know, why are you having trouble with your relationships? And they think it's like here, you know, maybe, I mean, under Freudian views, it's like conflict with your mother, conflict with your father, and I guess cocaine, because with Freud, it's either mother, father, or cocaine. He did a lot of cocaine, for real. That's a true story. They really like this cocaine. Cocaine's a hell of a drug. They wrote a lot of stuff. Because back then it was totally legal. It's interesting because they used to have medicines that contained cocaine, and they would be, when they had prohibition, you could still get cocaine, but you couldn't get like alcohol. So it is weird. Laws are weird. So that's our motivation. Vulgar view doesn't work, so we need something else. Now Hume basically is trying to consider these three factors, namely constancy, coherence, and cause and effect. So what is constancy? Well, and what he's trying to do is sort out, you know, why do we think, take an example of the folder, why do we think there's like a folder out here that keeps on existing when I'm not looking at it and doesn't depend on me? So if I were to like not be anymore, the folder could keep on going. So one reason for this psychologically is constancy, namely things happen in a constant manner. So for example, we take the folder, unless I like start like tearing it up or setting it on fire, if I hide it, bring it out, hide it, bring it out, it always looks basically the same. Same like this room. Every time I come to this room, unless something weird has been done to it, it looks basically the same. I mean, there are some changes, like there'll be like different stuff on the board, but there's a certain constancy. And so we think, since things, you know, like when you come into Tucker Hall, you come in, you know, you walk down the corridor, you come to this room, and you don't like go into this room and like step outside. And now, of course, you know, things could change, like you know, maybe renovating or something, but things work in a very constant manner. And so we tend to think psychologically, aha, this has a constancy to it that our perceptions don't. Because our perceptions, you know, they go, well, in and out of, you know, seemingly existence. But the room always stays basically the same. And, you know, Hume again, you know, things, you know, can be changed and altered, but in general, it's pretty constant. You know, when you're going around a building or going home or going places, then things are pretty much always basically the same. Now, even when change occurs, so like suppose you know, come back on Tuesday and the room's been repainted, so now it's blue for some reason, it's still a coherence to it. So we note that even in change, there is coherence. So things stay basically the same, and even when they change, things change in a coherent manner. So we're able to kind of like, you know, everything seems to, you know, be reality. You know, we'd say we think stuff's out there because it stays basically the same, and even when it changes in a coherent way. It doesn't change in like bizarre ways. I mean, it may seem like a little weird, but you know, there's a coherent, you know, story behind it. So, because of this, we believe that they're external, because they're constant, you know, with some exceptions, and when they do change, they're coherent. So a sensible explanation is, yeah, they're real. I mean, Hume doesn't bring up this point, but one way, if you wanted to argue about, you know, how do you tell dreams from reality, is are dreams constant and coherent? Like, for example, when you dream, do you have like a consistent dream world where you can just like show up and, you know, you like a video game, you always like appear like at a starting point, and it's like you can go over here and here's like this building, you can go over here and here's the river, or a dream's always pretty random. Yeah, for the most part. And so psychologically, we probably think we can tell reality from dreams, because reality, this building is, unless it gets hit by a hurricane or something, is always here. It's never like different. But when you dream, even if you dream of like, well, for example, my own case, occasionally I'll dreams of the house I grew up in, but always be kind of like different, like many more rooms or multiple stories, or it's like I kind of feel like it's my house, but it will be not. And it's always, it's always different when I dream about it. And so it doesn't have the constancy of that, what we think of as the real house. Same with this building. If you have a nightmare about being in class, it won't be like this. It'll be like all kinds of weird stuff typically. Yeah, so we tend to think that's the difference. Dreams are all inconstant and incoherent, and reality is generally nicely constant, nicely coherent. So, what about, well, Hume then brings up, again to make his argument, what about our feelings, what he calls the passions. And we do note that these passions are connected to each other and dependent on each other. But we don't think that our feelings exist unperceived. I mean, to go back to the example of Inside Out, we don't think that our anger and sadness and happiness are just sitting around in our brain, drinking coffee, waiting for their cue. We don't think the anger is like just hanging out. We think it's something that occurs. And then when we're not angry, we don't think, okay, my anger is back in the break room, doing some hot yoga or something, you're ready for the next round. We think it's gone. And so we have a different perception of our feelings. Now, so with our passions, we don't need to think of them as existing unperceived. So again, Inside Out is cute, but we don't think that our anger or feelings are like little things that, again, go in the break room and come out on stage to do their thing. But in the case of external objects, if we think of like the room ceasing to exist when we leave, that seems kind of weird. So like if you say to someone, where does your anger go when you're not feeling angry? They probably say, well, it doesn't go anywhere, I'm just not angry. When you say to someone, where's the building when you're not in it, they would say, well, it's still there. Because if we don't think of objects continue to exist, it starts, doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, to illustrate this, he gives an example, a long example, with the room, the porter, and the letter. So here's kind of how we seem to reason about stuff being out there. And essentially what he's saying is a narrative about how, the narrative about how things work only seems to make sense if you think there's stuff out there. And here's his example. So I guess he was sitting in his room doing some Hume stuff. Hume probably writing and drinking at the same time. Sure. He'd like to drink. Had some interesting adventures. He has a lot of cool backstories. Apparently, I'm not sure if this is entirely true or not, but it's rumored that he went to France. He was very interested in other people's wives. And one time he got caught and had to jump out a window while being shot at, which is, on one hand, terrible, but also, he's a person of action. Jumped out and survived that. So, David Hume, the James Bond of his time. Maybe he was the original James Bond. Yeah, he was there. That great movie idea. David Hume, the original 007, maybe 001. Yeah, 001. Hollywood, there are worse ideas they made into movies. He could be solving crimes philosophically.
I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe using a giant robot, because those are cool too. Yeah, like Pacific Rim. Great stuff. So there he is in his room, drinking and writing and thinking about giant robots. And a porter comes in, the door opens, porter comes in. Porter literally means someone who carries stuff. And porters get a letter, says, here's your letter, and then they go out of the room. Now Hume says to make sense of this, he thinks that, okay, there had to be stairs because he couldn't have just floated up into the room, because the human body can't do that. And he's got a letter from his friend, let's say Benjamin Franklin. He actually corresponded with Benjamin. And he thinks that, well, in order for the letter to get here from Franklin, they'd have to be, all the streets between here and the port, and then there would have to be the Atlantic Ocean, then it'd have to be like the United States, and then all the stuff there. And so to make sense of the letter coming from Ben Franklin, you need all the stuff between the letter, between him and Ben Franklin, all has to be there. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. Hey, for example, to use a non-Hume example, think about if, say on spring break, you're planning on going Disneyland or something. That only makes sense if there's a Disneyland. And having to drive all the way there only makes sense if there's a lot of stuff between you and there. Because one kind of sensible reasoning for there being an outside world is, it takes a long time to drive long places. Because otherwise, if there was no distance, you could just yeah, Disneyland could be right outside that door. So, we do think because of that, that this has got to be a real world that exists when we're not looking at it. Because otherwise, scenarios like that don't make any sense. I mean, today we could use a modern example like when you order something from Amazon. It arrives, so there had to be someone bringing it to you, there had to be roads. Then of course when you open it, there's a 99% chance it was made in China. So there has to be China. And so just the ordering the thing from Amazon, in order for that to make sense, there's got to be all this stuff. There's got to be, it seems there has to be a world out there. Now, Hume of course didn't know about video games, but in a way video games would provide a counter against this, which Hume would probably, if he was around today, he'd probably be drinking and playing video games, because that's right in between video games. Probably on Twitch and YouTube talking about stuff. And because everybody cool is on YouTube today, or Twitch, talking about stuff. And so, if you knew about video games, when you're playing a video game, like an MMO, you can have really long travel times. But of course, there's really no distance because the programmer can make it so you just go there instantly. Like in the original Warcraft, you used to have to run everywhere. So it's or fly places. So it used to be a long flight. I used to time, it's terrible, but I used to time, I do my chores when I was playing Warcraft, like cleaning and vacuuming, because I knew based on all the flight routes, how long it would take me. I could vacuum and mop my entire house on one of the flight things. It took so long. It's a really long flight. I could vacuum stuff really fast. I'm like, well, on the Griffin, time to mop. But of course, there's no reason that it had to be done because you could just, it's a game. There's not really that space. You could just immediately go from one to another. And some games do that. It's called fast travel. Instead of doing doing the whole distance, it's basically the equivalent of, and then you travel many days, and then you're there without all the traveling many days. Yeah, and so we could have somebody, the porter comes into the room like in a video game. You don't have to imagine that the programmers had to put in the entire world to make that happen. They just need that. All they really need is the door, and the porter appears, gives you the letter, then disappears. So a video game is a pretty good modern intuition about how reality could be not real. Maybe the only thing that's occurring is what you're experiencing. Because again, when you're playing a video game or watching a movie, they don't create the entire world like when they make a movie. They just do what you're seeing, like a sound stage, etc. So, but psychologically, we do tend to think there's stuff out there. Like, again, when we're playing a video game, if you think, okay, there's nothing beyond this, then you kind of drop out of the game. You're like, oh, then it's, or if you're watching a movie, like if you're watching, Infinity Gauntlet, you're like, oh, this is all just on a sound stage. There's really nothing outside of there. It loses its coherence. You think that the fictional worlds are real. You think that in that world there's all the normal mundane stuff and it's all there. They just don't show it, but it's all kind of assumed to be there. So one reason why we think, according to Hume, why there's stuff that keeps going again is that the narrative makes sense. And Hume doesn't bring up the example of the arts, but that would be a pretty good argument. Like when we're watching a play, we know, like we see a play down here in Charles Warner Theater, we know that they're just stage setting. But if you tell yourself this is just stage setting, there's nothing behind it, what happens to your enjoyment of the play? goes away. If you think, oh, that's not Othello, that's Bob from my stats class, and that's not, you know, that's not Venice, that's the theater, that's not a house, that's just painted, you know, plywood, then you don't enjoy it. So you kind of have to create the fiction that, you know, not only the person, that's Othello, not Bob, and that behind that scenery is, you know, Venice and all that world of, you know, the past. Yeah, so in a way, to have our narratives make sense, we've got to think that there is stuff persisting and out there. I mean, Hume didn't make that case, but if you, you know, again, another potential paper topic would be kind of the aesthetic view of, you know, the world. Namely that for the narratives to make sense, we've got to think that there's stuff going, even if we don't know there's anything beyond the stage, we have to kind of think that there is for the story to work. And maybe we're all just living in a story, like Shakespeare said, the world's a stage. So how do we do this kind of reasoning? Well, Hume notes that reasoning from coherence, and coherence is basically that, you know, it literally coherence. Things make sense. So when you're moving around in what we think is the real world, it's like, well, sometimes it seems like crazy, but generally, like, the appearance of things make sense. He thinks that's different from cause and effect reasoning. Why? Well, again, his view of cause and effect, which is kind of unique to him, is that habituation thing. So if we reason from cause and effect, we have to say A, B, and then if we do that enough, we start thinking A gives us B. Coherence is essentially an indirect thing. You know, it's the same, 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 it's the same. Okay, it must be real. I mean, for example, imagine you had a dream where you went someplace, and every time you dreamed, it was the same. You know, just like the real world seems to be. You might think, gosh, you know, I'm really good at dreaming this, but then after a while you might be, this is kind of weird. It's always the same basic thing. And you might suspect maybe this is like maybe I am in a real place, you know, because it's always exactly the same. And it's kind of weird because I might bring that up because I have like a couple places where I dream where it is like that. It's weird. One of them is a diner that I go to. It's always the same. Same person working there, same stuff. And it's like, the food's really good food. And it seems super, whenever I dream there, I'm like, sometimes I wonder, I wake up, I'm like, is this real? I'm afraid one day I'm gonna wake up with like, I don't know, like a takeout or something. Then again, free takeout. Take the dream dollars, that could be good. Yeah, so if you had a dream, if every time you dreamed, you appear in the same place, and then everything, you know, like a town, and everything was always the same, you'd probably start thinking, this is real. You know, I'm dreaming, but it's like a real thing. And that would be reasoning from coherence. Always happens the same way, so it's real. Now, this regularity in perceptions, well, here's the thing, according to Hume at least. We can't go from the perceptions appear regularly. Like, again, think of like the Tucker Hall. You know, you come into Tucker Hall, you get the perceptions of the hallway, the art in the hallway, you come down the hall, you know, there's the bathroom there, the water fountain, the doors, this room is basically the same layout, and it happens over and over again. But Hume says, we can't reason from that to infer that because every time we come here, it's basically the same, that all this stuff keeps existing and we're not here. Why not? Well, all we can infer is that whenever we come here and we're looking at it, it looks basically the same. But we can't infer, therefore it's here and we're not looking. Why not? Hume doesn't make this argument, but think of, well, I'll use a modern example of video game. And you could actually, video games are actually a pretty good way to argue for skepticism. So again, another topic would be how video games can be used to argue for skepticism. I mean, one would be this. When you play a video game, right now, even if you got a really good computer with like a lot of memory, it can't load the whole world. So one thing you run into when you play video games, you're familiar with this, is the loading screen. Namely, you've got to, you know, go there and it loads in like a zone or an area. And some games are super annoying because it's like long, like Anthem apparently has got really bad loading things. And that's because your computer can't load everything. Now, in that case, when you're going to a place, it's not there when you're not there. I mean, the code isn't the thing, but in a way, your computer, in a sense, kind of metaphorically speaking, creates it when you go there. So you go there, and it takes the code and then, you know, renders it, puts it there. And it's, you know, it's coherent, unless it's like crappy programming, even though whenever you leave and go to another area, that place is not there anymore, because your computer can't make it, you know, virtually work. And so maybe reality works the same way. Like, you go into a room, you leave the room, you know, in reality it's got really good loading time, so as soon as you leave the room, it loads hallway, but you don't notice the transition because it's, you know, you get a really fast processor. And this room is gone, but if you open the door and go back in, the room gets reloaded. And so the mere fact that it's coherent doesn't tell you that it keeps on going, because you have to see it when you're not seeing it. Now you can infer, there is a lot of coherence, but from the fact that it's coherent, you couldn't infer that it must exist when you're not looking at it. And again, one way you could argue this, if you want to do this in paper, is say, think of video games and loading stuff, or think of, or if we use an example from movies, they'll build like a set when they do, you know, shots there, but then of course when they're done, they just take it down, you know, and get rid of it. So even though like when you're doing the shot, or especially like back when they didn't have a lot of, like shows that didn't have a lot of budget, they would often have to like repurpose the sets every time, or like, you know, change it a little bit, and so you'd see like, hey, wasn't that the other thing? And so when you leave it, it's gone. Then you go to another place, and then when you leave that, it's something else. So you could use kind of the video game or aesthetic, you know, the life as a play. So you can imagine we're actors in a play that don't know we're acting, and there's like a stage crew behind the scenes setting up everything. Like, so as soon as you step through the door, they've already got the hallway set up for you, and then you walk. You know, we're so good at acting, we're full method actors. We think we're in the role. Maybe. So this apparent you know, regularity doesn't show to us that what we're seeing is really real. Now, Hume, again, sort of unique to him, as we saw, he separates out reasoning of relations of ideas and reasoning of matters of fact. And he thinks, or thought, because he's dead now, maybe he's still alive, maybe he's wrong about it. He believed that we didn't have an afterlife. So if he's right, he's not thinking anymore. But if he's wrong, he realizes he's wrong because he's thinking that. Anyways. So according to him, anything we reason about matters of fact has to come from what he calls custom. Basically, we perceive it over and over and over again. And roughly, he's saying kind of a roundabout way, again, the empiricism stuff, you know, comes from the senses, and according to Hume, the way we reason about things is just repeated exposure. Kind of like radiation, I suppose. Now, he claims if we're going to extend this reasoning beyond our perceptions, it's got to be from something else. Why? Well, it can't be from repetition because we never actually see. So what happens is we have the same experience over and over, similar, and then we think, you know, the building's got to be like the same, so it exists inside of my mind. But of course, we can never see building in perception. So then what are we doing? Well, what he claims is this. It's essentially imagination. We're imagining this. Why? Well, basically what we're doing is this. Use the example of the expo marker. So we see the expo marker, put it behind our back, grab the expo marker again, and of course, you don't know it still exists. It's behind my back. Maybe I'm like a wizard, disintegrate it, and I create a new one with my useless expo powers. I mean, it's expo person, the power is to create expo markers at will. I guess you could sell them. Hey, actually, I wouldn't be that terrible. You could sell a whole bunch of them. Have your company, zero cost, just shipping costs. Actually not useless after all. So we think that it only makes sense if I, take out the marker, that the marker keeps on going. But of course, we don't see the marker, so you can't see it. So why do you think it's still there? Well, imagination. We imagine, we literally image that it's there, even when we can't see it. Because if we think about this, going back to kind of like the sensible narrative, if we think of the building rooms vanishing every time we step out of them, imagine like a show where that was the thing, like, that reality is just as, it's just what you perceive. And you have like a camera, watching the actors, and the room just, they step out, the room vanishes, and stuff, but the show was otherwise perfectly normal except for that one feature. And you couldn't do it as a long series, but it could be like an interesting, like, single episode thing. And so that would be like weird. So what we do is we imagine that there's more building on the other side of this wall. We don't see, like, if you have a car, you don't see in your car now, but you imagine it's still there. Because otherwise it seems like weird and incoherent. Yeah, so the world in a way only makes sense, like, even though I can't see beneath this floor, I imagine there's like Earth, and then on the other side there's like more Earth and more than the other side of the planet. And so what we do is we just kind of imagine that stuff keeps persisting. Again, like with the example of the expo marker, hide it and take it out. We imagine it's still there, even though we can't perceive it. So essentially what we do is, it's just in a way a matter of habit or natural for us to just sort of think it keeps on going. So it's kind of like the draw habit. It's kind of like if we're perceiving the object, and so then if it goes out of our vision, we don't think that when it gets out of our field, like you're looking forward, it's like when if you ever go to the optometrist and they're doing the thing where they can, like follow their fingers, we don't think they'd stop existing when they get out of the range. So if we see something moving across our field of vision, we naturally think it keeps going. So if it like goes around like our head for some reason and then comes back, we think that it's like if you have like a bee flying around your head. You don't think it vanishes when it gets behind your head. You think that when it comes back, the bee it kept on going. And we don't see it, so it must be we're just imagining that it's there. And sometimes we get wrong about it, because sometimes it flies off. We think it's still there, but it's not. So, where do we get the notion that it keeps on going? Hume's answer, imagination. So going back to the monster in the closet, kind of the same deal. Why does little Billy think there's a monster in the closet? Imagination is imagination. So, what we end up doing is, the constancy by itself, of course, or the coherence by itself, not enough. What we do then is add in constancy. So we look at the objects, or look at them, we think of them and say, okay, we got coherence, they seem constant, so they got to be real. They got to be out there existing apart from us. Now, so from that, and we'll close this in our minute, we then think that they got to keep on going. So coherence plus constancy gives us the idea that they keep on going. So why do we think the room is here when we're not here? Well, every time we come here, it's basically the same, and because it's coherent, and there's a constancy about it. So we imagine that it's got to be here. But do we actually know? And the answer is we'll see. No. So next Tuesday, of course, I got meetings, so no class on Tuesday. But on Thursday, we're back for our normal adventures, and we'll find out the exciting conclusion of David Hume. And it's trying to work out.
Interesting news.